In early May, Jeff and I departed on our boat trip from St. Petersburg, Florida to Key West. After months of upgrades, repairs, and outfitting the boat with safety equipment and lots of comfort items, our Intrepid 377 Walkaround was ready for the task. And while the boat might have been ready, I was more than a little apprehensive, as this would be my first multi-night trip on a boat. Jeff grew up doing lots of trips like this on a sailboat, so I think he was ready for anything. But I wasn't. Safety was my top priority, and lucky for us, as it would become essential on this trip, we got the night vision installed just in time. With just a little bit of starlight or moonlight, our Psionics camera provides a clear display of what's ahead. So, with nothing left to do other than take the trip, we did just that. The first leg from home to Marco Island was rough. I described it to my family like traveling on a bumpy dirt road full of potholes. It was a very long 5.5 hours. While it may not look like it, most of the waves were around 3 feet and we had to travel directly into them. It was a relief for both of us to finally reach the marina in Marco Island, where the water was calm and a beautiful sight to my sore eyes. But relief was short-lived when we discovered a hydraulic leak at the brand new autopilot pump. And of course, no store on the island that carries the appropriate fluid was open on Saturday, which was our only day there. A big shout out to our technician Martin at Blue Water Custom Marine, who volunteered to drive down to Marco Island all the way from Tampa to diagnose and fix the problem. Luckily, he didn't need to, because once Jeff was able to research oils, dig and crawl around in the boat, we learned that Mobil 1 Synthetic could get the job done. So, after an Uber ride to Napa Auto Parts for 3 quarts of Zero Weight 30, we were back in business and headed to Key West, only slightly behind schedule. The ride down to Key West was smooth and the water was beautiful. At that point, I was actually starting to enjoy the trip. But don't tell Jeff that. We enjoyed the next few days in Key West, eating, exploring the city, stopping at all the tourist traps, starting on Duval Street and hitting Margaritaville, of course, and Sloppy Joe's, and watching all the other tourists and wacky things in Key West, then later to the Hemingway House. And finally, we were back to relaxing on the boat, tucked safely away in the marina. We enjoyed the peaceful evenings at the end of the dock, where our slip gave us the best view of the sunset. It also gave us plenty of time to oogle the other boats, multiple times our size, that we could only dream of, but it was fun to imagine. Someday, Wheels, someday. The next day's adventures took us to the Key West Lighthouse, where we learned all about the different families and generations of families who steadfastly manned the lighthouse. It's a remarkable sight in the daylight, and we could only imagine the treacherous and dangerous work that was required in storms and hurricanes. We climbed the tower, and my legs burned, but apparently Jeff's frequent climbing of ladders had his quads in much better shape than mine, so he didn't even feel it as we climbed our way to the top. The little walkway around the top of the tower is not one I'd recommend for anyone afraid or mildly apprehensive about heights, but it sure was a great view. And here's Jeff, dutifully taking instructions from me to help display the Florida Keys lighthouses and coral reef. Thanks, Jeff. After that, we decided the trip wouldn't be complete without a walk to the southernmost point of the continental USA. But is it really the southernmost point? The next day, we headed out for the Dry Tortugas, the pinnacle of our trip. Located 70 miles west of the Keys, we hoped for a smooth ride, but alas, My indoctrination into boat life was more like whitewater rafting on the Colorado River, except we were out in the Gulf. I failed to film the 6-foot waves, but felt a wash of relief when we finally spotted our destination. The water was beautiful, the fort was impressive, and we ended up with perfect timing as the passenger ferry wasn't running the day we arrived. So we got to dock where the ferry does and nearly had the island all to ourselves, except for those who camped on the island, arrived by seaplane, or were there working to repair the moat, but still, almost alone. Now, you might be wondering, why does a fort that is sitting out in the Gulf need a moat? It's already surrounded by water. Well, I thought the same thing, but actually it helps to protect the fort from damaging wave action and hurricanes. The moat water is not stagnant because of its design and is crystal clear. It's deeper than it looks, and you can see all the life and vegetation that thrives in it. Fort Jefferson is reported to be the largest masonry structure in the Western Hemisphere, and, according to the National Park Service website, it is the largest all-masonry fort in the United States. It was built between 1846 and 1875 to protect the nation's gateway to the Gulf of Mexico. The plaque from a moment ago described Fort Jefferson as a bustling little city during the height of the Civil War in 1863, with roughly 400 people on the island. Fort Jefferson is composed of more than 16 million bricks and is still considered to be an unfinished fortress today. The National Park Service website explains that the fort was never completed because of fears that additional bricks and cannons would cause further settling and place more stress on the structure and the cistern system. Some of its distinguishing features include decorative brickwork and 2,000 arches. But time, weather, and water continue to take their toll, necessitating ongoing stabilization and restoration projects. It truly was an amazing place to visit and experience firsthand. After we toured the fort, we jumped back on the boat and anchored just off the island. We relaxed, set up our little sunshade, grilled some food, watched the sunset, and waited for the evening to end. Even though we chose the most protected spot at anchor, it did not make for a restful night. A front blew through and we swung around 180 degrees all night with 30 to 40 knot winds. Combined with the 3 to 4 foot waves that crashed over the reef, the V-berth where we slept felt like a roller coaster. The next morning, we decided we experienced enough of the Dry Tortugas and didn't want another night like that, so we headed back to the Keys. It was during that leg of the trip that I experienced my first time being chased down and then boarded by the Coast Guard. They were just doing their job, out protecting our waters and conducting random safety checks and inspections. We had no illegal drugs or fish on board and more than enough safety gear, so we enjoyed their company and passed the inspection. It felt good to know we weren't alone out there, and our Coast Guard is helping to keep us all safe. It only made sense at that point to go explore the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Ingham Memorial Museum once we were back in Key West. The Ingham was built in 1936 and served for 52 years. It did 31 convoys across the Atlantic from 1941 to 43, performed 12 Mediterranean convoys, served as flagship for 6 landings, including General MacArthur's return to Corregidor, served in Vietnam 1968 to 69, and in 1985 was America's oldest and most decorated naval vessel with 21 ribbons, 27 medals, and 14 battle stars. The Ingham was retired in 1988 and everything was left on board, except classified records, of course, making it a time capsule from those days, including dishes, x-rays, and cigarette packs. Today, it is a National Historic Landmark and restoration is an ongoing project. With a little bit of history and education under our belt, we found ourselves back in the Hemingway Social Club. But then, It happened. Our starboard engine died as we were on our final leg of the trip. We were planning to head straight from Key West directly home in about 6 hours, but just a mile from departing Key West, the engine gave up and it couldn't be fixed. So our only options were to limp back to Key West and deal with a logistical nightmare of getting ourselves and 2 weeks of gear home while trying to find a place to store our boat until Jeff could retrieve it or find somewhere there to fix it. Or we could call sea tow, which wouldn't get us anywhere faster. Or just suck it up and limp the entire trip back home at 10 miles per hour, which would take us just around 25 hours total. We watched the sun slowly slip away, giving us a beautiful sunset. But the night grew darker and darker, and I was not loving it. It was unsettling to be out in the Gulf, desperately begging to be able to see the glow of the moon, and then watching in horror as I realized there would be a period of no moon and no sun. Neither were visible, and it was definitely darkest before the dawn. Jeff, of course, was unfazed by all this, as he spent many a dark night on the water, but I need to feel the solid earth beneath me. Thankfully, the morning came and Mother Nature had gifted us with calm water throughout the entire night. We eventually made it back to John's Pass and into the ICW, home at last in Madeira Beach. Our boat is now being repowered with new engines, and I have a bit of time to de-stress back on land, happily staring out at the water from the balcony. Until next time, thanks for following the adventures of our Mad Beach life.